Hi, I'm Nick Copwood from the University of Technology, Sydney. Welcome to this third video in my series of 4 about publishing in academic journals. This is all about how good journals are, how we know how good they are, and how we try to measure that. So things like impact factors, other status indicators, and altmetrics will be covered. So here we are now in the third video about status indicators, impact factors, altmetrics, and things in between. So how do you know how good a journal is? Well, this is certainly not all the ways of telling, but it's a useful summary that gives you a sense of the different sorts of approaches. There is impact factor. This is probably the most well-known and the most established notion of how to measure the quality of a journal. It used to be owned by Thomson Reuters. It's now been sold to Clarivate Analytics. Impact factor is a measure of how many times a journal article from a particular journal is cited in other journals on a particular list where the people doing the counting look. The advantage of impact factor is it tends not to get it wrong. In terms of if there's a very high impact factor, there's a really good chance that yes, lots of journal articles from that journal are widely cited. It's seen as the gold standard in most of the science disciplines, and lots of the journals, at least those run by commercial publishers, give the impact factor on their home pages. So the journals are actually linked to impact factor. It also has the strictest standards for inclusion, which some people think means you've got a better quality measure. But those strict standard means it doesn't look in a very large number of journals compared to other measures, and it completely ignores books and book chapters in terms of where it looks for citations to work. So you get lots of false negatives. Journals with a low impact factor, they might actually have lots of citations, but they're just not in the journals at all, or not in journals within the relatively narrow list that impact factor looks at. There is a time window that often is irrelevant in many humanities, arts, and social sciences fields. If it takes 18 months to get a journal paper published and then somebody has to read it and then write another paper, the chances of being cited within 2 or 3 years are very slim. And in fact, some of the best work in those fields may be still cited 10 or 15 years later. That's not going to affect an impact factor of a journal. Whereas in sciences where new knowledge tends to replace old knowledge, it makes more sense, and the publishing is quicker, it makes more sense to have a short time frame for measuring quality. It also takes a long time for a new journal to be included within the list of journals that impact factor looks on. So lots of people rely and say it's the best, but it has some clear limitations, particularly in Haas fields. There is the SJR or SCImago journal ranking. This has a bigger list of journals it looks in, and it's very easy to look up. You just type the journal title and then SJR into Google and it'll come up. You also see very easily the trends, how their equivalent of impact factor, the SJR measure, has changed over time. It's not so respected in the sciences, and it's not often quoted on journal pages, so it feels like it's a little bit disassociated from the formal journals. There's a new one called CiteScore, just released in December 2016. This is again more inclusive than impact factor. It is also powered by Scopus. You get the SJR information when you also look at the CiteScore, so you might as well, I think, go to CiteScore directly. Book series can get a score as well as journals, and journals are included more quickly when they're launched on the CiteScore list, as long as they meet some basic quality criteria. The disadvantages here are it's new and it's not quite clear who will use it or value it as a benchmark, and it actually looks at all content in a journal rather than just the peer-reviewed content. So it might mean sort of some false positives in that you get a higher score just because you don't have much editorial content or something like that. There was another way of doing this in Australia, which was I call the zombie ranks. Lots of academics got together within disciplines and ranked the journals A star, A, B, and so on. And it was seen to be more meaningful than trying to put a number. You know, is an impact factor of 0.141 really better than an impact factor of 1.5? You know, who knows? Is that really a meaningful difference? So a collection of kind of grades, if you like, seemed to be more sensible, and it wasn't based on measurement. It was based on an idea of peer review. But it was abandoned by the Australian government, and no new journals will be ranked in this system anymore. And peer review does not necessarily mean that you guarantee good decisions. Now, how are these things calculated? Well, the impact factor looks at the citations to all refereed papers in Journal X over a particular time frame, and you can see there's 2-year or 5-year impact factors. And then it takes the number of refereed papers published in that journal over that time frame. So it's how many citations divided by the number of papers. In CiteScore, it's looking at all the citations in the documents from 3 years and dividing it by the number of papers published in a particular journal over that same time frame. So it's a similar kind of equation for both of them. Now, altmetrics look very differently. Altmetrics give a score to a journal rather like Impact Factor gives a score to a journal, but this looks up in how many news outlets mention things, blogs, if it referencing policy documents. They look for Twitter. No, it's not tweets mentioning the author or the title, it's tweets with links to the Digital Object Index, so the URL that has that DOI information. I mentioned DOI in the first video. It might look on Facebook pages as well. Mendeley, which is a referencing system. So altmetrics look in a whole different set of different places to come up with a different score. And it doesn't mean that if you tweet the same link 15 times, you're going to increase your score by 15. It's smart enough to know, and it wants really different people to be tweeting links to a particular article to get a high score. So altmetrics are a measure of activity around academic content, not just citations or download figures. So Wikipedia, course materials, mentions in policy, range of things. Now you have to think about, well, how is your paper going to get into these things if you just leave it there on the web? You've got work to do in making people aware of it, and not only aware of it, but making people realize that your paper is worth reading and then quoting. So how do you know whether a journal is any good or not? Which indicators should you pay most attention to? Well, part of the answer to that depends on your field. If you're in the sciences, impact factor is going to be really important. If you're in the humanities, arts and social sciences, you probably want to be aware of the impact factor, but you're going to be much more reliant on some of these alternative measures. Particularly, my guess will be CiteScore is going to become one of the kind of go-to indicators to use. The absolute number is almost meaningless. Relative number compared to other journals in the field is really important. In some fields, an impact factor of less than 10 is regarded as low. In my field, anything over 1 is regarded as quite high. Soft indicators, don't forget these. I mean things like, are people that you really respect publishing this in the journal? Are people that you respect citing articles from this journal? That's not a counting thing, that's thinking, who's really good in my field? What are they reading? And where are they publishing themselves? And you can tell where they're reading because you can look at their reference lists and see which journals they've been looking in. And perhaps the choice of the journal isn't about status in the first place. It's partly about status, but it's most about whether you have a paper that looks and feels like papers that are already in this journal, i.e. it's a question of fit or match between the aims and scope of the journal and what you have to say. So, choosing a journal to target. Like I said, the most important thing might be, are there papers that look and feel like mine? Then you might look at the aims and scope, but the aims and scope aren't always brilliantly written. So finding precedent for papers that are starting the conversation that you're going to extend and join is absolutely preferable. Of course, you want to look at status values, but you don't want to take them at face value. And remember that soft indicators might be more meaningful. If you've got 5,000 words you need to write, there's no point submitting to a journal that's got a 2,000 word limit, and you should know that before you even start writing. You need to do your homework about the publisher. Does this publisher support video abstracts? What does it cost for open access if I want this? What kind of open access will they allow? What will their Sherpa arrangements be with? What can I do with the Word version that's accepted if I get accepted? You might all want to investigate time to publication. Some journals review much quicker than others. You can sometimes tell that by the information that comes under the abstract. It'll give you a guide as to how long the review and publishing process is taken. If not, you can usually email the editor. Thanks for sticking with me for 3 videos, only 1 left to go. The 4th video will be about peer review and start off for some of the key issues that we'll be discussing in the workshop.